Apparently it just randomly turns on with an ad, and that is the most horrendous thing I've ever heard in my life. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a very special video. I'm talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, and that is The Fifth Element. Check out my shirt. I mean, it's pretty old and faded, but that's okay. This shirt is awesome. And the reason I am talking about The Fifth Element today is that the 90s Luc Besson movie is now 25 years old, and guess what I have? The novelization. So, look at all these stickies. So this video is not a review of the Fifth Element book or a review of the movie. In truth, the book is pretty much just the movie in book form with some small differences. It's not the worst book ever written. There are some entertaining turns of phrase as well as an easy prose. I read this book in probably about 2 hours. It's very easy to read, but it's pretty mediocre and does not need to exist. Yet, because this is a book channel, I thought it would be fun to go over the differences in the two medias and talk about the book given it's the 25th anniversary. So if you watched my astounding science fiction book tag video, you'll know The Fifth Element was my favorite movie for like 15 to 20 years. It's recently been ousted by Mad Max Fury Road, so I know the movie line for line pretty much. So I am qualified to make the assessments about this book. I mean, if I do make a mistake, you can correct me. It's fine. I don't really care. There's going to be tons of GIFs and images throughout, so this is going to be a fun little video. So basically, I'm just going to go through and talk about all the flagged differences and expanded information that you Super Green fans might be interested in. There's also a couple critiques because there are some aspects about the movie and the book, more so the book, surprisingly, that are a little bit dated that I think it'd be kind of fun to talk about because it's kind of funny. The first thing that happens. So in the movie, Billy, the archaeologist's assistant, is set to get the grappa wine after the professor dumps it out, but in the book he drinks the water first, so he is dead. R.I.P. Billy. Number 2. The book explains that the missiles that Stoddart fires at the Black Mass, which I'm just going to call Mr. Shadow from now on, are powered by cold fusion. That's interesting. They're just like, oh yeah, it's cold fusion. I'm like, okay. Number 3, the book claims that Corbin Dallas is in his mid-30s. Now, Bruce Willis was 41 when he played the character, so while that's not a big deal in itself, when we get to Lilu's age, it's a bit kind of gross. So anyway, we'll get to that. You know that TV that's playing in Corbin's house, you know, when we see that Gemini Croquettes ad for the first time? According to the book, it is a cheap unit that doesn't have an off switch that like came with the apartment. Apparently it just randomly turns on with an ad, and that is the most horrendous thing I've ever heard in my life. That is awful. Like, imagine the divide of the rich and the poor there, right? Like, you've got people that can't afford a better TV who are forced to watch ads compared to, like, rich or middle-class people that can afford to, like, not have a TV just blare ads at them all the time. Like, wow. So, number 5. Okay. So, you know at the scene in the movie when that guy, I can't remember who plays, like what actor plays him, I don't think he has a name, tries to rob Corbin, and then Corbin's like, oh, you know, the gun's not loaded or whatever, and then he takes it. So we do get this scene in the book, but the guy doesn't wear that amazing hat that makes him look like the hallway, and that is a shame because that scene is so funny in the movie. It's so good. Number 6. Okay, I'm going to get to that out of the way now because it's pervasive, and I might as well talk about it. So Leeloo is awesome. Leeloo is great. You know, but she's not handled very well in the book or the movie in terms of her sexualization. Lilu's age isn't stated in the movie, but in the book it says she's 18 or 19, and Mila Jovovich was 19 when she filmed the movie. So first, we have an age gap between her and Corbin of 23 years, if we're doing Willis's age and Jovovich's, or at best 17 or 18 years. Now, I have no trouble with a May-December romance or with age gaps. My parents are 14 years apart. But there is a difference between an 18-year-old, who is still a teenager, come on, dating someone 20 years older compared to even a 25-year-old doing so. There is a maturity gap here. The older you get, the more mature you are, the less age matters. Some some 18-year-olds somewhere are mature enough. Yes, okay, there are exceptions, blah, blah, blah. But Leeloo specifically is pretty much a baby. She wakes up in a new world, new body, new everything. And then a much older man takes advantage of this vulnerability to ingratiate himself to her and then tells her he loves her. It's gross, okay? Not to mention the non-consensual kiss scene. Now, you could read the whole thing as, oh, true love doesn't care about age. But given Luc Besson's track record with women, yeah, he's a sexual predator. I doubt it. Leeloo being that age was intentional. It was intentional that an 18-year-old girl be sexualized. It's the 90s. This happens. Still happens today. Bit more particularly egregious in the 90s, but okay. I still love the movie. I can critique it and still love the movie. It is something, though, that we should talk about because it's A, interesting, and B, relevant socially. Now, the book could have resolved this. The book could have explained that while she was built into an 18-year-old body, the age in Montessori is doubled. Or, perhaps the book could have spent some more time making her seem mature via dialogue or backstory from Vito Cornelius, or show why their love is actually love and not just some 40-year-old having a rather gross crush on a woman 20 years younger than him. But no. The book does absolutely nothing to fix this. It just rolls with it. So yes, in the movie, Leeloo does wear some pretty revealing outfits, and she takes her shirt off as a joke a few times. Though, in the movie, the men do turn away, which is polite. The book, though, goes way above and beyond sexualizing her. There are so many times in the book that her body is described as perfect, because the perfect woman's body is not this. It is an 18-year-old fashion model. She's always described as perfectly nude, because she gets perfectly nude many times. There's this line on 132 that I have to read because it's just egregious. Okay, so she gets naked again for some reason. She's shockingly, fetchingly, adorably, magnificently, wonderfully, and totally nude. Perfectly nude. Okay. There's a scene where she eats honey and angel food cake in this like hyperbolically sexy way. Like, I laughed out loud. It was so funny. She's like, what the fuck? And her body is very often described in detail. It's like the male gaze on steroids. In fact, even when she's being built in the replicator machine in the book, when she's just sinews and bones, she's described as beginning to twist and writhe in a sensuous and graceful movement. She's just a bunch of bones. Like, what the? Anyway, okay. So, this is a mid-90s book where the idea of strong female character in action movies means you were sexy and you were given one scene where you fought and or did something smart. And no, I'm not saying we can't have sexy characters. I love sexy characters. I mean, Leeloo in the movie was probably a bit of a sexual awakening for me. But unless it's a Michael Bay movie, we're doing a lot better balancing sex appeal with over-sexualization, which whether it's by giving ample eye candy moments to the men as well, or toning down the overtness of the male gaze. Oh, and no, this book nor the movie does not pass the Bechdel test. Anyway, let's move on from that. Number 7. Speaking of Leeloo, in the book, she does not wear the white thermal bandages. Clothes like dump down on her from above, and she just like puts them on. I'm like, okay. Number 8, before Leeloo lands in Corbin's cab, we get a scene in the book where Corbin does a fancy maneuver to get a cab fare to a place early, but doesn't get a tip and then complains about not getting a tip. So that was kind of funny. And I mean, it comes back to that whole thing of, I wonder if this book is trying to make a point about like how poor Corbin is, like given the ads and all this crap. I don't know. It seemed like it was trying to say something, but it never really got there. The evade the cops scene is pretty much the same in the book, except Leeloo moves to the front of the car instead of sitting in the back. We're finally going to get to Zork, who's my favorite. So in number 9, Zork has 2 assistants in the movie, the man who informs him of the economy heating up, and then Right Arm, the guy who pretends to be Corbin Dallas. In the book, they're conflated into one man named Right Arm, and yes, there are a lot of jokes about his name that are really dumb, and I'm not going to mention them. Number 10. The part when Zork blows up the Mangalores in the warehouse is less impactful in the book, because in the movie he's all badass standing outside the warehouse smoking and the bomb goes off. But in the book he just like gets into a limo and then blows up. I'm like, no, man, give him some style. Number 11. In the book, the floating restaurant is called Thai Flyby, which is an amazing name for the restaurant. Number 12. So Zorg in the book has next to no motivations and no backstory, kind of like in the movie, but he's still pretty awesome. I mean, he steals the show in the movie for me anyway. When I was in my early 20s, I had a problematic crush alert on him, despite the odd headgear he wears, which is also not explained in the book. Gary Oldman was 39 when he filmed the movie, so now I am the right age for Zorg, I guess. But greedy businessmen are no longer appealing to me as they were when I was like 20. I don't know why I thought he was so attractive when I was 20. Oh wait, I know why. Because we read the Scarlet Letter in some like American history course in university, and then we watched so I watched the movie that has Gary Oldman in it. It's pretty handsome in that, and he's also handsome in Dracula. So transference, I guess. Anyway, Zorg in the book gets all these fun lines like, so after Cornelius says, even if I knew where the stones were, I would never tell somebody like you. Zorg looks offended, or perhaps flattered, or perhaps a little of both. I just thought that was fun. And then there's another one that's great. Zorg's voice was as cold as midwinter midnight. What does that mean? Also, unlike in the movie, in the book he claims that religion kills more people than his weapons, which I laughed at because it's true and because there's no way they would put that in a movie in the 90s, but I'm pretty sure they would put that in a movie now. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they cut that line for the movie. Number 13, the little critter Zorg keeps in his office is called Picasso, which makes sense. It's multiple colors. 14, in the book we're told Mr. Shadow is just a big old ball of antimatter, or perhaps it uses antimatter. They don't really tell you. No one's really sure what Mr. Shadow is. 15, Corbin gets a dessert from the Thai place that makes him throw up. I'm not sure what the point of that was. In fact, it seemed a little bit, I don't know if I would call it racist, but it seemed a little bit just kind of, I don't know. I wasn't really particularly fond of this. I'm not sure what the point of it was, and it seemed like it could be going in like that kind of direction, but I'm not sure how. So yeah, that was just a weird kind of scene. Number 16, the treatment of Major Iceborg, who has to endure the general deliberately checking out her boobs and reducing her merit as an officer to that piece of her anatomy, is handled in an equally sexist but somehow transphobic way in the book. The 90s. Number 17. In the book, the smoke you guy is introduced earlier than his random arrest in the movie, but explaining that he's Corbin's perpetually grouchy neighbor who says, like, fuck you to everybody. It's also explained that he looks a bit like Corbin, too, so when he gets arrested in the movie, you're kind of like, okay, that seems random a bit, but in the book, it, like, explains why he was arrested and how Zorg set it up, all this stuff. 18. The reason why there are so much garbage at the spaceport is that the garbage collectors are on strike. Another interesting kind of like world building detail. I swear this book was trying to say something, but it didn't know what it was trying to say, and it did a poor job of doing. Number 19. Leeloo does not do the multipass scene in the book, unfortunately. Multipass. 20. For some reason, there's a police pig as a sniffer dog. I'm not sure why. I maybe it was a 90s like cop joke. I don't know. 21. Ruby Rod's name in the book is Lockrod for some reason. I don't know why. 22. The travel to Flushton is a little different in the book. Corbin and Leeloo have a conversation before sleeping, and they cuddle while sleeping rather than Corbin just getting like knocked out. The conversation is not that interesting. It's just a bunch of Leeloo asking questions about sex stuff and Corbin getting flustered by it, even though he's a 41-year-old man who has been married before. Yeah, it's kind of odd the way that they depict him as being like in the book he's described as being like really kind of shy and stuff, but it's not really explained. It's just odd. 23. The scene when the general is frozen in Corbin's freezer actually has repercussions in the book. He gets frostbite and has to have like his fingers amputated, which is kind of funny. I always wondered that in the movie because like it's so ridiculous that they get frozen and you're just like, okay. 24. When they arrive on Flushton, Leeloo punches out a guy who kisses her in greeting. Go Leeloo. Should have done that in the movie. 25. The diva and Leeloo pass each other in the hall, and the diva touches Leeloo's cheek in the book. In the movie, they don't have any kind of real discussion at all. She just talks to her assistant like in the hallway. So this was kind of an interesting kind of, I thought that was actually more interesting. 26. Rather than Corbin being unable to find Leeloo in the hotel, he takes her to their room so we can get another random perfectly nude scene with her, and then he pretends to give her a bracelet, which turns out to be a laser handcuff with which he affixes her to the ceiling, basically done to keep her safe, but it's dehumanizing and essentially kidnapping. I am glad they changed that in the movie. This was a common thing. Finally, people are starting to realize that tying a woman up or locking her in a cage or doing something like that to keep her safe is highly problematic, and I'm very glad that we've stopped kind of doing that in movies, because it's just, yeah. 27. Leeloo uses powers, some kind of powers, to solidify and then shatter the handcuff. It's not explained. She just has these powers. It's like, okay. 28. Cornelius rescues the security chief Fogg from a broom closet after they're attacked by Bangalores, rather than being arrested and then being in the room randomly when Corbin saves the day. 29. The bomb scene is very different too. So rather than them barely miss each other in the hallway, which honestly is so much fun and a great part of the movie, Zork shows up in the room when the group is still there, and where he uses a credit card, which is so funny, to add 5 minutes to the timer. There's that thing again. So like rich people can afford to like save their lives and poor people can't, I guess. Because I think we're supposed to assume that he paid to get more time on the bomb. That part was interesting. Anyway, then Ruby faints for some reason. Number 30, also in this scene, Corbin uses the "your safety is on" trick on Zork, but instead of the safety, he's run out of ammo. Corbin then punches Zork out and calls Leeloo his wife, which Zork is admittedly confused about mid-punch. Number 31, Zork wakes up to find the bomb about to explode. Instead of the "oh no" scene, which is great, he holds the ZF-1 over his head, and this mauve magnetic force field protects him from the blast, sending him flying out to an unmapped glacier somewhere on the planet. He tries to call his secretary, but his phone cuts out, and then he's left there to freeze. He sits there and it's just like, I need to think. And then that's the end. You're like, I guess he's dead. Who knows? He's resourceful, Lord. He survived. 32. So it's Ruby in the book rather than David who figures out how to get the stones to activate. Small detail. 33. This is a cool part, actually. So the room in Egypt begins to ooze goo on the walls and stuff when they're trying to set the ritual thing up. That would have been really cool to see in the movie, but they didn't do that in the movie. Maybe they ran out of money. I don't know. That would have been really neat, because it's kind of showing that I guess they do the shadow on the walls in the movie, but in the book it's like black ooze, like literally just like infesting the space. I'm not sure what the black ooze is. The black ooze going to take over the whole world? I still am not clear on Mr. Shadow's kind of motivations. He just kills everybody, I guess. Pretty generic villain, to be honest. The ending is exactly the same. Yep. So yeah, that's the difference with in the book. There are 3 90s things that are kind of silly that I wanted to mention that happen in the book. So they're in Egypt at the start, and apparently none of the ruins have names. I highly doubt that's true. In fact, it seems to be a very "these people are uncivilized" way to depict another culture. This happens a lot in older books, like Victorian era books, but also books from like the early 1900s. Some British person, a British explorer, will go to a place and be like, "Oh yeah, look at this undiscovered ruin. No one's ever seen this before." But meanwhile, there's indigenous or people or just people that live in that country who have seen these many times, and they do have names for them. It's the same concept of how, European colonists thought that indigenous cultures didn't maintain the landscape. Like they thought that all the forests here in Canada, were perfect because that's how they grew here. It's like, no, the indigenous tribes here maintained the forests to make them that way. Like, anyway, that's just a bit of a interesting thing. There's a comment, this is in the movie too, how the president says that there's 200 billion citizens on Earth. That is an insane number. Earth can sustain maybe 10 billion people comfortably. Like 200 billion people would not know. Oh, the 90s. Apparently, when you surf the internet too fast, according to the 90s, this is what happens. Leeloo was surfing around the internet so fast that the modem cable was smoking, the hard drive was whining, the chip was barking like a dog. That's not how the internet works. So that's just kind of my take on this movie. And yes, as I said, there are some problematic elements about the movie, but you can still like movies with problematic elements. I just thought it was fun to kind of talk about it. And yeah, so if you haven't watched The Fifth Element, you really should. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't read the book, don't read the book. It's kind of a waste of time because you can just watch the movie, which is a lot better. Am I going to keep this book? Of course I'm going to keep it. But will I read it again? Maybe I'll read it for the 40th anniversary of the movie. We'll see. Thank you.